Weekend Bulwark Podcast. I am Charlie Sykes. So it does look like summer 2022 is ending with kind of a bang. So that's why we're going to wrap up this week with a conversation with my colleague Tim Miller, New York Times bestselling author. Tim Miller.
So good to be here. August, I was supposed to be quiet. Sleepy August, a myth.
Yeah. But this is sort of it. I mean, this is we're coming up to Labor Day. That's the
Yeah.
kind of quasi unofficial end of summer. I don't know whether this is like the old times when people would say, "Well, that's when the campaign season begins." But of course, the campaign season never begins because it never ends. It's like one of those those infinity loops now, right?
Just pushing that boulder up the hill every day. That's true. And here in Oakland, summer is really in October, so which is really nice. It's our hottest month of the year. So it's kind of, I think the rules are out the window in 2022.
Yeah, in Wisconsin, summer is 3 weeks in July. So
Right. It's already over. You've already put up your pumpkins.
Yeah, so it's not like we don't have a lot to talk about today. There's abortion, there's student loans, there's reports and threats of coups, investigations. Today is Happy Redacted Mar-a-Lago Affidavit Search Warrant Friday. You and
Hey.
I do not know what that's going to be, so we shouldn't speculate about it. But, I just hope that people don't have irrational expectations about something that's probably going to be a lot of like black crossouts. I don't know.
I'm just hoping that, on one of the pages they just accidentally use the see-through Sharpie, like that.
See-through
So
Sharpie.
maybe we can kind of get a picture. I just want.
My bad. My bad. Oops. Yeah.
Yeah, we don't know what will be in there. I don't want to
No.
get over my skis, but I do want to say one thing that was interesting this week that shouldn't get lost, which was that the Trump legal team, to the extent that it exists, might just be the game show host himself, filed a motion, requested that the archivist demonstrate what the justification was for the various documents. I think assuming that it was going to embarrass, I guess, the Biden administration, or it's unclear what they were assuming. It's not exactly the best legal minds over there. And what it revealed earlier this week was that Joe Biden and the executive branch had completely recused themselves from determining, which of these, documents were appropriately classified. He did not have his hands in there. There were a lot of wild accusations about this supposedly politicized investigation. That was number one. And number two, it like went into greater detail than we had about like how sensitive the documents were. I knew it was just an utter cell phone by Trump and his like OAN pinup lawyers. And so, at this point, with the information we've got, DOJ, archivist, White House has been doing the right thing. We'll see what more we learn.
It is a bit awkward. So rather than start with the most important stories of the day, shall we talk about the most trivial story of the day? There's
Let's
a lot of
do it.
competition for that.
Please.
You tweeted out a clip from
Yeah.
Jared, who what is he? He did a Megyn Kelly show apparently in front of a locker or something. It's not clear. You wrote a sociopathic slender man summarizes his self-help book for Megyn Kelly, and he goes through the deep thoughts, the life lessons. Here is lesson number 3 from Jared Fail Son-in-Law. Let's play it.
And number 3 was don't apologize. I think that, we're kind of in a post-apology world where people take up an apology as an admonition of guilt, and then they just, cancel or hit you even harder for it. But
okay, can we just play that one more time? Because I want to.
There's a lot to unpack there.
I know. Just play it one more time because I have some trivial points and some deep thoughts about Jared Kushner's deep thoughts. Play it again.
And number 3 was don't apologize. I think that, we're kind of in a post-apology world where people take up an apology as an admonition of guilt, and then they just, cancel or hit you even harder for it. But
so is it petty for me to just flag the fact that he misuses the word admonition? He wants to say admission, but he says admonition because I don't know, that sounds smarter. What? I don't know what.
Are you admissioning him for misusing his language in that podcast?
So it is true that we're in a post-apology world, but he's stating it as this is a good thing, right? This is one of my lessons in life. Never apologize. As self-help books for hundreds of years have said, as religious leaders for centuries have said, never apologize, never confess to sins, as fathers have told their sons for decades. Son, never apologize, never admit error, never what? Okay.
Yeah, 2
You,
layers. I'm glad that you went the biblical route because I have 2 more kind of practical concerns with the advice. Number 1 is, I cut that part off because it was just, like, the most embarrassing and shameful all in one, but the broader context of this clip, these lessons, is he was sharing with Megyn Kelly the lessons that he learned from his father-in-law, Donald Trump. The first one was, I believe, that controversy elevates message. I think the second one was something about never back down, something like that, and the third one was never apologize. The interesting contextual point about all of this is that, like, his father-in-law lost by 7 million votes, and more people turned out to vote against him than any president in American history. And so, I don't know. Maybe there should be some reflection about whether the lessons that he learned from his father-in-law were actually even if they were moral and ethical, which they plainly are not, as you laid out. Maybe they also aren't great lessons for winning. I don't, I maybe had his father-in-law been a little bit more apologetic, shown a little more humility, been less prone to trying to elevate message through compromise, maybe he would have won re-election running,
he did. He
you know.
won bigly.
Oh, that's a good point. He won bigly.
Lesson number 8, never admit defeat, never concede,
Yeah,
ever. And
yeah.
if lesson number 9, if you are served a big pile of shit, say that it's gold. And enough people will believe you, and you just say it over and over and over again, and that
And it worked for him. Otherwise, in the podcast, this is why did this. I had too much coffee before the 11th hour with Stephanie Rule last
oh,
night.
yeah.
And so I was up late and I decided to punish myself and hope it would help me fall asleep listening to The Sociopathic Slender Man with Megyn Kelly. And he wouldn't admit, to Megan's credit, I'll give her one merit and one demerit. To her, on the merit side of the ledger, she did try to get him 4 times. She asked him to say whether it was a legitimate defeat, and he wouldn't do it.
Well, of
So there
course.
you go. I guess never apologize, never admit defeat. But on the demerit side, I did find it interesting that after, this little privileged fucking man child who has had everything handed to him by his criminal
There goes the
father,
explicit rating. There it goes.
criminal
Mhm.
father-in-law, like, oh,
Yeah.
really? You never had to apologize. I wonder why. Anyway, uh, I noticed that Megyn Kelly didn't follow up with what I thought would have thought was the natural follow-up, which was, I don't know, I would have liked an apology when your father-in-law told me that I was menstruating on live TV,
Ooh,
just because I was doing my job. That would have been nice. An apology would
she
have been
she
appropriate, I
she
think.
she she got
But
over that.
no, I guess I shouldn't do that. That wouldn't be tough. So, yeah, I don't know. I wouldn't recommend going on Jared Kushner's podcast tour as he promotes his book, I Am Slender Man. But I will say this one final plug is he has passed me in the Amazon rankings. So if listening to this segment this weekend, if you are one of the few
Fortunately,
who've
you're not
not
bitter.
purchased New York Times bestseller, why we did it, because I'm not at all bitter about being beaten by this freaking lightweight sociopath. But if you want to help me push me back up the rankings, right back ahead of them, buy a gift. It's Labor Day weekend, beach read, looking for something very not uplifting to read over your Labor Day. Why we did it? Amazon.com. I still have the
This is
competitive
important,
juices
yeah,
flowing.
I can tell. So I had a couple more thoughts about this. I'm looking at his face. I'm looking at the sociopathic slender man summarizing, his deep thoughts. And I'm thinking, who
Botox.
would look at him and go, "Hey, I would like to invest several billion dollars in this guy who's just basically admitted whatever you do, don't ever apologize. Do not ever allow yourself to be held accountable for your fuck ups." Yes, I want to Tim Bin Miller. I would like to give him $2 billion to invest because I trust this man so much. That's number one. Number two, unless you want to weigh in on that.
Well, this you mentioned his face. Are we getting to the Botox, or are you just were you just moving past that?
I'm not going to.
I do think it's odd. I mean, I nothing against Botox. I think everyone should do what they think is right to make themselves look as appealing and feel good and self improvement. I'm for all of that. I don't know, a 40-year-old that has like a weird kind of Slytherin face. I don't know that like
Slytherin.
the lip injections were really
That's good though.
helping him.
You just slip that in the Slytherin face for people who thought that You could listen to the Bulwark podcast and not have a Harry Potter reference in the first 10 minutes. All right. The other point, though, is that understand that to the extent, and please bear with me here, to the extent that there is a Trumpian philosophy, this absolute belief that you never apologize, you never admit error, you never ask for forgiveness is pretty fundamental. I mean, that is one of the absolutely base beliefs of this guy. And go back, you remember, I'm sure you do. I'm sure you remember, sure it's
I was there.
burned into your memory. The Iowa Family Leadership Summit
Mm.
in 2015, I think, or
Mhm.
2016. He was asked whether he'd ever asked God for forgiveness. And Trump, I actually have this in front of me. And Trump answered, I'm not sure I have. I just go out and try to do a better job from there. I don't think so. I think if I've done something wrong, I think I just try to make it right. I don't bring God into that picture. I don't. Now, see, I was so naive back then. I'm thinking that saying this in front of a group of Christians in the
Yeah.
old sense of the word, they would go, okay, this guy clearly is not one of us. I mean, there's a certain disconnect there, Tim. I mean, I'm not a theologian, but I'm thinking that a guy that says, yeah, I sin, forgiveness, don't really even think about God there. It's really not relevant. No, I've never asked for forgiveness. And yet you think about the impact he's had on the general culture, and more specifically among people who consider themselves Christian, and they listened to that and they went, "Hmm, this is our guy." You know
Yeah.
what I'm
One
saying?
final thought,
Yeah.
just as a Catholic, as a cradle Catholic, it is just a mystery of all time that the Catholic integralists, the people who are basically looking for a Catholic junta in this country, the most devout, so to speak, or, claiming to be devout Catholics, your Sohrab Ahmari types, convert, have chosen this person. I mean, I know of all the, I think I can speak with the most expertise about Catholic doctrine, and confession and asking for forgiveness is like literally about the most fundamental element of your responsibility as a Catholic. And to think that they would have turned to this guy, despite the fact that we've analyzed it and overanalyzed it and written books about it,
Yeah, yeah.
it just still remains hard
Right.
to make that connection in your head about how these guys do it.
Yeah, it's worse than that, though. Is not
Which
only have
is
they accepted him, and you could argue, well, they
and they
did it.
want him to lead the junta.
Yeah, yeah, that they wanted power and they were making the Faustian bargain. I mean, okay, so that's bad. What's worse is the way in which so many Americans have internalized the same anti-value, which
Yeah.
is you never apologize, you never confess, you never allow yourself to be held accountable, you never ask for forgiveness, and the way that that has turned the political culture on its head, including the culture of people who, again, 5 minutes ago, I mean, by which I mean 10 years ago, would have said these were fundamental values. This is the way you raise your children. This is the way you were raised. This is,
Right.
this is why we talk about sportsmanship. This is what a man is about. And so you have the coarsening of the political culture and of the Christian political culture that emulates the worst elements of this guy they've embraced. So, the fact that they supported Trump is awful. We've talked about that. But the way in which they have become, and that they will go out and they will buy books telling them never apologize, never ask for forgiveness, and they go, yes, yes, this is right,
Yeah.
because the other side is just so awful. I mean, that's. Could I also mention one other thing though?
Oh,
In
please.
Jared's defense,
Oh, no, never mind.
I had the pregnant pause there because people, what? No, no. The thing is that apologies are difficult. I mean, let's talk about this. I mean, you and I both know this. Apologies are difficult because there
Really
is
hard.
another culture out there which basically says we will never accept your apology. That if you do apologize, they will, as he sort of suggests, will double down on you. We kind of know this, right? There are people who for whom there is no forgiveness ever. There is
Yes.
no coming back. And so you can kind of understand that at a certain point, when you have apologized, when you have asked for forgiveness, and people use that as a cudgel to beat you over your head, you understand how you create, homunculuses like this who will go, okay, so because that didn't work out well, because there are assholes out there that will never accept my apology, then let's not apologize anymore. And I'm
Well, you know what
sure
that's
that
called, Charlie?
what?
Building
What?
character.
Yes, exactly. Thank you.
That's
Thank
why
you.
we used to teach people. That's why this is a virtue, right? It's not a
It's
virtue because you just
hard.
get to apologize and it's easy and people just let you off the hook. And after everyone lets you off the
Exactly.
hook, I don't. That isn't. Those weren't the lessons that are in the Bible or Canterbury Tales or
Exactly.
any of our founding documents. So
Because it's hard, and
it's
that's what
hard.
it is. It's easy. You don't wave a wand and get absolution. You have to do something about it. But that's right. That's
The Hail
why that's
Marys.
called building character. And basically, this entire movement that was all about character counts is like, "Pfft, fuck character. That's for cucks. You know?
Well, anyway, here we are 17 minutes in. If you want to just get riled up at night,
Yeah.
if you had your coffee a little too late in the afternoon like I did, I just recommend Megan Kelly's new podcast, Vice Signaling with Megan Kelly
Oh,
and
okay, okay.
Jared Kushner. It's done as good. A lot of content.
Okay, now we have to get serious here. The politics of abortion, a lot of data points, lots of polls out here. Two stories I wanted to bounce off you. In Arizona, Blake Masters has apparently decided to scrub his website. He's
Yeah.
backtracking. He had all kinds of things about, detailed support for a federal constitutional amendment that would ban all abortions everywhere. I'm 100% pro-life, all of that. And now that language is completely gone. I just have the sense that there are going to be a lot of stories like this because in the primaries it was easy. Well, you had to move as far right as possible, and also for the last 50 years, Republican politicians have been able to take the most outlandish positions, knowing that it was theoretical, it was never
Yeah.
real. And now they're kind of scrambling, and he's down by double digits in Michigan. Yeah, the Republican candidate for governor last week explains that rape victims should have to have the babies because they would find healing through giving birth to their rapist baby. This week, Republican Tudor Dixon is now trailing Democratic incumbent Gretchen Whitmer by double digits. So this is not working out well for them at the moment.
Yeah, I'm about to break one of Jared Kushner's 12 rules for sociopathic living right now by saying that I got this a little wrong, I think, when Dobbs was overturned. I expected the increased engagement from Democrats, obviously, and I thought that it would help them, close that enthusiasm gap. One thing I think I just didn't quite expect, and partially this is, Democrats deserve some credit here about having some relative um, restraint in their messaging and the response to this and how they've responded. And part of this is they really didn't do anything. They just got this huge gift from all of these horrible Republican candidates who have no chill and no restraint in their extremism. But what I kind of expected, right, was that your median voter was going to look at this after Roe and just think, ugh, the Democrats are running to their far extreme and want to, codify all these rules that I think are a little bit, over the top about late term abortions, et cetera. Republicans are running to their extreme. And here I am stuck in the middle again. And that has not happened. And I think that right now, a median voter looking at the abortion environment says the Democrats are basically advocating for status quo. There's some examples in certain blue states where they're trying to expand abortion access, but basically, if you live in Pennsylvania, right? If you live in Wisconsin, the median state, you're like, well, Evers is pushing essentially for keeping the rules as they are in the state, and the Republicans, meanwhile, are pushing for just absolutely batshit as extreme as humanly imaginable laws. And we're seeing them be put in place in other states. So I'm seeing this change happen, in a place like Missouri, where it's like you have a 1 week abortion ban, no exceptions. You see the video from South Carolina of the Republican state rep saying basically, when we passed this heartbeat bill, I did not mean for it to be where a 19-year-old woman could go into a hospital and have a non-viable baby that happens to have a heartbeat and not be able to get a surgical procedure. That was a Republican legislator in South Carolina who is saying this. So now if you're a voter looking at this, you're like, wow, the Republicans are for radical change here in a way that I don't support. They're pushing these issues that are in the
There was
10% and
yeah, yeah,
Democrats are yeah,
yeah.
go ahead.
This was going to be determined by who was able to frame the issue in such a way that the other side was extremist and The Republicans basically said, "Hold my beer. We got this."
Right.
And rather than debate this issue or try to change hearts and minds, they went to ramming speed to push through these criminal laws that were way beyond where even the mainstream of the pro-life movement had been. We're talking about the
Right.
exceptions for rape and incest, questions about the life of the mother. And look, this is complicated for me, and I think it's complicated for you. You and I have both said very, very clearly that we have been pro life for a very, very long time. And yet, watching the new extremism of the pro life movement, I think is distressing. And part of my disappointment with them or alarm has been that I think that there had been some significant progress in changing people's hearts and minds
Yeah.
outside of the criminal code about all of this. I think that there was a cultural shift, that was, taking place, after people, would have the, ultrasound images and pictures and things like that. But the pro-life movement now, as it's going from victory to victory and strength from strength in these legislatures, is no longer in the business of persuading people. They're in the business of grabbing for the most absolutist kind of legal solution possible. I
And
mean,
punishing, and punishing.
and punishing, and yes, making it very, very punitive. A lot of it's very, very performative. I mean, if you look at the polls, you can see where people are. There is a sweet spot of allowing abortion up to a certain date, limits after that. Clearly, there's almost no constituency for the kind of thing that you're seeing in some of these trigger laws, rape and incest. And yet, you have the Republican nominee for governor in a swing state like Michigan sitting down and explaining why a girl who has been raped should have to have a baby. This is like the talking point from hell. 5 minutes ago, the more reasonable voices in the pro-life movement would have said, "You definitely don't want to go there. That is exactly not the kind of debate you want." And she just went there, and I think she's going to get hammered for it, hammered at the polls.
Yeah, and I think that if defining terms here is really important because this is all changing in flux, and
Very
what
much.
conservative means, what all these things mean have have been evolving. I think there'd been a lot of stasis in our political terminology for a long time that's developing now, and I think that put the pro life movement people kind of aside. I think your average pro life voter, right? I think that if somebody said, my view is that, abortion should be legal in the first trimester, maybe up to 20, you can pick a week number, before the child's viable, whatever it is. There should be exceptions for rape, incest, life, health of the mother. We should be decent to the mothers and try to give them support,
Yes,
right? Like
correct.
they would
Yeah.
say, I'm pro life. Like I think somebody who has those views would define themselves and say, I'm pro life. Okay, so I think now what is happening, this is you see this in Kansas, is a person that held that view who says I'm pro-life is looking at what is being proposed and are like, I'm horrified by what
I
the
think you're exactly
pro-life
right.
person is proposing,
I
right?
agree.
And this is just creating I think massive problems for Republicans, and that goes to the Blake Masters ad, which is you can just see that his polling is showing this, and that so this Blake Masters ad, if you want to watch it, you can Google it. He is also he and Kushner are very similar. I don't know if they're
Mhm.
going to the same facial reconstruction doctor or if there's
Yeah.
something that's happening in the lab there. I don't know
A
what's going
little bit
on,
of
but
micro needling, yeah.
yeah, it's very
Yeah,
creepy. But
scrubs,
but
yeah.
this this
Oh,
ad
acid
this ad, and
baths,
this is a
yeah.
serious topic, Charlie. This
Yeah.
this ad, just is basically him saying, "Okay, I'm trying to reframe this right now because everything that we've been talking about the last 5 minutes is right, right?" Like, he had the personhood amendment on his website, which is basically, a complete ban on abortion. Any fertilized egg, is a human, and it should be criminalized. So that was his position during the primary. In this ad, he tries to reframe this by saying, "Oh wait, no, Mark Kelly is the extremist. He's the one that wants abortion on demand. What I really just want is kind of a ban on partial birth abortion and late term abortion, right?" And this new view of
No,
Blake
yeah,
Masters,
no,
radically changed view,
yeah.
is like this is what I'm saying. That view that he's landed on was like the view that a lot of people who were nominally pro life had, right? Like, and so now he's like quickly like trying to swim and, doggy paddle back to this position. But the problem is he's now going to be on a ballot with Carrie Lake on the governor's ballot and with other people like Tudor Dixon throughout the country who are sticking with the personhood thing. It's going to make it impossible for him to credibly, make this pivot.
No, I think you're right on all of this. And y- the latest poll out of Michigan shows the way this is shifting. And you said you had underestimated this. I all along thought that the initial polls, it was going to take a while for public opinion to catch up with the new environment, because basically you had a 50-year reality that had been changed. And so everything that we had thought we understood about the politics of abortion suddenly was gone. And so, for example, a lot of focus on whether this energizes Democratic voters. I think this is also having a tremendous effect on Republican women voters, many of whom, had been pro-choice but voted for anti-abortion politicians because they weren't firing real bullets, right? I mean,
Yeah.
so it was no big deal. I was talking to somebody yesterday who has voted up and down the list for anti-abortion Republicans, despite her beliefs in abortion rights and very strong beliefs in abortion rights, because nothing would ever happen. Well, now that's completely changed. It's changed the formula. And I think that you're starting to see this latest poll. I don't know whether you've seen this out of Michigan, the one that shows Gretchen Whitmer up by 22 points. This is the Epic MRA poll in Michigan. They were asked, would you support a state constitutional amendment protecting abortion rights? 67% said yes, 24% oppose.
Wow.
That's a hell of a shift, because I'm guessing that if you would have asked, questions about this a year ago, you wouldn't have had that kind of, overwhelming margin. So things are,
Just one other thing on this Tudor
yeah.
Dixon thing in Michigan. I talk about this a little bit more at length. I'm the guest on Sarah Longwell's Focus Group podcast this week. So if people want a double dose of Tim this weekend, you can go over and check that out. But the short version of this is Dick Tudor is really running in kind of the Mike Pence wing of the party, right? Which is a little different than some of these other candidates. And that had demonstrated to be a failure in a lot of these purple places, especially purple leaning blue places like Michigan, because of these social issues, right? Like Trump, to the woman that you were talking about, I don't know if she was a Trump voter, but there are a lot of voters out there who are secular, pro-choice or whatever, modestly pro-life, but we're not zealots about it. That Trump appealed to them more than like Cruz or Pence, right? Because they looked at Cruz and Pence as these kind of weird, creepy, like very domineering, patriarchal kind of Christian conservatives, and that wasn't them, right? And Trump, would manage to successfully create a coalition where the evangelicals, completely sold out all of their biblical values, as we discussed at the top, to go along with him. But then he got to bring in these secular voters in places like Michigan, where, to the stereotypical working class white guy in the diner that the New York Times went to visit. These people, because they didn't think, look, Donald Trump's not going to ban abortion. He probably paid for
Right,
abortions. Like Donald
exactly.
Trump's not going to ban gay marriage. Like, he likes musicals and he's from New York City. And so these people justified it because they agreed with him on some of the other cultural stuff, right? Like anti-woke or whatever. And so now they look at someone like Tudor Dixon, I think, and she's going to have trouble keeping the Trump coalition together. Some of these new secular voters that came in were like, I do not want a far right Christian conservative banning abortion in the state, and so I think that in a lot of ways it kind of revealed a crack in the coalition that maybe some of the on the Republican side didn't realize were there.
Well, there's another crack as well in this coalition that you're saying. Now, you mentioned the issue of gay marriage. You probably followed what my home state senior senator Ron Johnson has been saying about whether he would vote for federal legislation codifying gay marriage. Initially, he indicated that he would vote for it. He didn't see any reason why not, because of course gay marriage was here to stay. It was he had no problem. So it looked like Ron Johnson was going to surprise the world, shock the world by actually voting in favor of this bipartisan legislation. Well, no, because he got beaten up by the Wisconsin Family Alliance or whatever, and is now saying that it's completely unnecessary. I can guarantee you he's going to be a no vote. I always thought he was going to be a no vote. But this again reminds us that there is a short leash for some of these politicians with their base. So Blake Masters may be scrubbing his website that said he was 100% pro-life, right? But there are going to be the crazies in Arizona who are going to go, wait, are you getting squishy on us? They're going to
Mhm.
make it very hard for any of these guys to pivot to the center on these culture war issues. I
And
mean,
this was a this
this.
was the
Yeah,
lesson that sociopathic Slenderman should have taken from his father-in-law, is that Trump was able to kind of swish and swash between these sort of groups, with a little with more skill than all these imitators are, because, like, of his word salad, right? And people, like, projected stuff onto him because he was a celebrity and, like, he gave these, like, weird answers, like his weird type diction, and so he didn't get pinned down in the same
that's
way
right.
that a less skilled Blake Masters type politician is going to, and I think he's going to find himself in a really a tough spot, especially unless he can convince Carrie Lake to move with him. He's running on the ballot with somebody who's running on a complete ban, no exceptions. It's hard to be like, well,
Yep.
I'm pivoting to the middle.
Yeah, that's a great 8% issue there. Okay, so let's switch gears, talk about the military. I posted in my newsletter today a partial transcript of my conversation with Elliot Ackerman, who is a decorated Marine combat veteran who's written a book about Afghanistan. And we got to talking about the military culture and the politicization of the military, whether or not the military would ever get involved in elections. And let me just read you a little bit of what he said. He said, I'm really not trying to be an alarmist, but we have such high levels of dysfunction domestically. And every time we kind of set up these scenarios where we're asking our military to play a role in domestic politics, we are really tempting the fates. The analogy I use is that these really bitterly contested elections remind me of a drunk driver. Drunk driver will go to the bar, right? And they will get completely hammered and they'll drive home. And probably the first time they do that, they make it home. And then they do it again and they make it home the second time and the third time. And then the fourth or fifth time, they get hammered drunk and try to drive home. That's when they wrap their car around a telephone pole. When I look at our contested elections, it's like we're doing the equivalent as a nation of going to the bar, getting just hammered drunk, and we try to drive home. We've done it twice now, and we've sort of managed to make it home. But one of these days, if we keep doing this, we are going to wrap our proverbial car around a telephone pole. And he's talking about, okay, so the line held on the military, getting them involved in all of this, and this culture is pretty strong, but the culture can break. And one of the things that in the back of my mind, I keep thinking, we think of the military as being this, really meritocratic organization and, how hard it is to get to the top. And yet we have all these batshit crazy generals who come out. I mean, the Michael Flynns and others. And it's like, how did they get to positions of power? How many other of these complete deranged nut jobs are, strutting around in uniforms with the bars on them? And so talk to me about one of these guys, is General Bolduc, who is running for Senate in New Hampshire. I mean, he's the kind of guy that's sort of in my back of my mind about, what's really going on there and how worried should we be? So tell me about General Bolduc.
The general is how
The
they're for
general, yeah.
I've been doing a lot of audio self-harm lately. I got turned on to this article listening to Bannon's podcast last week, and
Oh
he
my
just refers
God.
to this guy as the general, which kind of gave me these Air Force One flashbacks to, like, release General Radek, in the podcast. I don't know, I couldn't get that image out of my head, but
Yeah.
this General Bolduc is just very Flynn-esque, right? In that he had risen through the ranks, retired from the military, started to get involved in politics, started to get involved in also, some nonprofit stuff. I had someone, a couple of people send me after the article was up that he did a lot of real, I think, good advocacy on behalf of people from the military who had PTSD, though. That also, like, kind of begs this kind of sort of question about people who've experienced, that sort of thing. I think is even people in the military get concerned about, how, what in these high stress environments, you put somebody who had that experience and now they're in a high stress, political environment, and that can have, like, this kind of crazy making effect on people. Jason Kander wrote a great book about this recently. So anyway, Bolduc has, starts to just kind of go get red pilled, and I'm sure he's always conservative, but kind of go deep into conspiracy world, right? And he is deep in the microchip Bill Gates conspiracy. So the only chip he's putting in his body is a Dorito. a very which I'm sure doesn't have any mystery ingredients that he has to worry about. But went very down the rabbit hole about how Bill Gates and Soros are behind Black Lives Matter, how they're a terrorist organization. He started obviously being defensive of Confederate monuments, a very popular position up in New
Of
Hampshire,
course.
which was not part of the Confederacy. If for those of you who are
No.
still kind of working on your geography, and then the election lies, and to Ackerman's point, he signed. You might remember the letter.
Yeah, this is bad.
124 retired generals and admirals released a letter saying that Joe Biden stole the election. Bolduc was one of those people. I mean, that is alarming to have that many people with that high of rank in the military just advancing this complete lie. So Bolduc is a lunatic, the political angle for the article is that basically Republicans, this is just a less known, Herschel Walker situation where in theory, in a good year for Republicans, New Hampshire is a winnable state had they put up like a mainstream Republican, like their popular governor, Chris Sununu. Instead, they're putting up this Confederate sympathizing conspiracy theorist who has very low chance of winning in a state that Biden won, and so another just horrible candidate quality issue. But I do think I like where you went with this. I do think the militarization of our politics is alarming, and I think it's just worth noting because
Very
this is on
dangerous.
friendly turf for us. I think if you look back in retrospect, the intelligence community types weighing in on the Hunter Biden laptop was a massive mistake, right? And all of I just so I don't think it's just the kind of red pilled conspiracists, though they're the more acute concern right now. Just having more front and center role of the ex-military is a little uncomfortable.
No, I completely agree with you. So let's stick with the Senate race and the candidate quality issue
Yeah,
for a moment, because the New Hampshire story is really interesting because that was one state that Republicans had a reasonable, plausible chance of flipping. In a
yeah,
Republican year, like Georgia, like Arizona, like Pennsylvania, et cetera, and yet they went with Trumpian candidates. Okay, so speaking of one of the races that again, you and I are both probably still struggling to figure out what are the new rules in politics, because I mean things that would have been disqualifying in any other election cycle might not be, who knows, anymore. Okay, Dr. Oz has been underperforming. He has turned out to be a terrible candidate in Pennsylvania. He's trailing in the polls, and he's apparently made a kind of an interesting quotes around interesting, please, a tactical decision that he's going to go after Fetterman's health. And apparently, this has now become a new big thing. Of course, John Fetterman had a stroke. He's back on the campaign trail. He clearly has some issues. He will pause.
yeah.
He will miss some words here and there. He's a little bit awkward, but he's been doing great on social media. But there's clearly an issue there. And one of the questions it was, would Dr. Oz go there? Would he go after John Fetterman's health? He actually put out a statement saying, if John Fetterman had ever eaten a salad, he would never have had a stroke. And people are going, that's really sick, man. And yet the Dr. Oz and his circle are going, no, let's double down on all of that. So is this going to backfire, or is this I am a doctor and I'm sorry to tell you this John Fetterman is just not up for this job. How's that going to play?
Yeah, that was a spokesman that put out that thing, which I just want to mention because as we talk about all of the ways that the culture has been debased in our political culture, like that was not the type of thing that in my day spokespeople were putting out. It's one thing to do that on a debate stage, candidate to candidate, but just kind of have a spokesperson freelancing, attacking somebody's stroke, and such
Jeez.
personal terms. It's just a different kind of world. But I don't. I think it's a sign of a desperate campaign. There's an interesting poll came
It
out.
feels that way, yeah.
Republicans were pushing this poll, and it had Oz only down 4. Because he'd been down more in a lot of the other polls. So a lot of my former colleagues were pushing this on social media. But if you look at the poll deeper, it was interesting. The same poll had Trump up 5, I think, or 6 in Pennsylvania. So, which seems very hard to imagine that he's up 5 or 6 against Biden, but who knows? He lost, as we all know. So Oz trailing Trump by 10. No matter what you think about the ballot number, it shows that there really are some Trump Fetterman voters out there, right? And so it's like, how is Oz going to be able to get back? And you assume that's probably Obama, Trump, Fetterman, right? Like, how do you get back into
Yeah.
that, like, kind of blue collar guy, that is maybe not as economically conservative, probably pro-choice, or if we're stereotyping at a broad brush, and how do you get at them? Maybe this sort of Trumpian domination trolling is the path, because like Oz is just such an effete, Hollywood guy, right? Like he's never going to be able to out Fetterman in there. So is there a different way that he can dominate him? Is there a different way that he can kind of weaken him? And I think this is a sign that they don't really know how to do that, except for, I think that they'll go very hard on the criminal justice issue with ads, and probably trying to troll him on his health. So I expect we'll see more of this.
Yeah, I mean, there's a way of doing it deftly and,
Yeah.
perhaps cleverly. I don't sense that they are going to go that way.
No.
Okay, so I'm gonna need to take a deep breath here because I'm almost exhausted talking about it now.
I know.
Um,
I was wondering if
yeah,
you were gonna skip it. We got this far in the podcast. I
no,
was like, maybe
no,
Charlie
no, no,
can't do it.
because I have to tell you that my sense is that the progressive Twitterverse does not have a feel the way the student loan forgiveness is playing out here among swing voters. And it strikes me as a significant own goal, bad politics, bad policy. You know how I feel about this. And we can argue all that. The Republicans are reacting like they've just been given a big hunk of catnip. And when I say it's an own goal, Biden was on a roll. They had just passed this Inflation Reduction Act. There were a lot of things that were, you know, giving them a little bit of momentum. This gives the Republicans exactly what they wanted.
Yeah.
And so where do you come down on this? I just think it's unfortunate on so many levels, which we can get into. But what do you think?
I just want to table for a second the policy. I do want to get
Yeah.
to that, because I have a little bit more mixed views than I think you and James did. I
Mhm.
listened to yesterday's podcast. Not totally
Mhm.
for, but more mixed. So I want to get to the policy at the end. The politics. There are two things here that I would implore people who are very big cheerleaders of this to understand, as far as the political reality. Number one is just, we went through this. Like, we've been talking about how great Biden was doing at dividing the opposition and uniting his own side. This is just a fundamental political strategic move, right? You wedge the other side, you unite your own side. That is the best way to, to expand your political base, and to do well in elections. That's just the simplest way to understand politics. Biden wasn't doing that in 2021, right? BBB was dividing his own side, the human infrastructure, right? And he wasn't taking these easy wins on infrastructure and other things. That had changed this year, and we've been complimenting him. The gay marriage and contraception votes, abortion. We've been talking about ad nauseum. The infrastructure bill, the smaller BBB bill, united his side. Uh, Here we are back again, going for an issue that divides his own side, and you have all these Democratic politicians that are having to speak out against it. People who I in my life who are Biden voters, people that are part of the Biden coalition, don't like this. Maybe they shouldn't feel resentful. We can talk about the merits about this in a second, but they do. So if you are slightly demoralizing certain people on your own side and exciting others, so you're dividing your own side, and everyone on the other side is excited, you're giving them something to talk about besides Mar-a-Lago, besides abortion. Like, that's just a sign that it's not a political winner, right? Like, maybe it will motivate a certain class of person to come out to vote in the midterms, and it'll give a little boost in certain places. But I just, at a fundamental, basic analysis of politics, I just don't see how you can look at this and say, okay, well, that's a clear win, because it's not. So that's my political
No,
analysis.
well, I think you're absolutely right, and you're seeing this play out here. Axios is reporting. The Republicans have already launched an ad blitz mocking the Biden student loan plan. I mean, they love this. This is from Axios. Republicans are confident the president's plan will be politically problematic, and are backing up their spin with paid advertising. They're going to run ads on college football games, Major League Baseball games, and it features a waitress, a mechanic, and a landscaper talking about working extra shifts to help theater majors and business majors get out of debt. Landscaper in the spot says, Biden's right. You should take my tax dollars to pay off your debts. My family will figure out how to get by with less. What's more important if we spare college graduates from any extra stress? Mechanic follows up. Want to be a struggling artist? College is on me. Okay. I understand all of the arguments and a lot of whataboutism. Well, didn't we forgive this and with that? Look, I'm against all of those, all of that mooching. All of it.
I do think it's funny, by the way. Sometimes people do forget that we used to be conservatives, and I have a lot of people in
Yeah.
my feed that are like, "Well, what about wasn't TARP unfair?
Yeah.
Wasn't this
Yeah.
giveaway unfair?
Yes.
Wasn't that giveaway
Well,
unfair?" And I was like, "Don't you remember that? That's what we all were
yeah,
saying
yeah.
back then."
We were all
Anyways,
against that sort
sorry.
of thing. Okay, so this thing is very, very costly. I mean, this is going to cost about $500 billion, so it is a big deal. But also, and to your point about the politics, as you know, there are really complicated, hard to explain issues, and then there are easy to explain issues.
Yeah,
Things like BBB and even the Inflation Reduction Act are really complicated and difficult to explain. This is very easy, which makes it more deadly for people who say, I don't see how this moves the needle. It definitely moves
yeah.
the needle on so many different things without even getting into the policy about all of this. So, no, I agree with your analysis. And again, having just passed the Inflation Reduction Act, this gives, whether it's true or not, gives Republicans a tremendous talking point about inflationary spending. And it does feel like a pander to their own constituency, to Biden voters. It looks like a pander, it walks like a
Yeah.
pander, maybe in fact it is a political pander, and it's got all the worst vibes. I'm sorry.
I want to add one other negative thing before I get to the elements of it that I think that maybe the Democrats can try to work with now that it's happened. But I think this is important, and I want people that are supporters of this of good faith to listen to this because this matters. The legal part of this. Okay, I didn't go to Larry Tribe's class. I'm not a constitutional lawyer, but like, just it's preposterous on its face that the president of the United States can buy fiat, just pick a number out of the air and determine this is the amount of number that we are going to forgive loans because we're in an emergency. Like, we're not an emergency. Like, there's no reasonable definition of emergency that defines the situation that we're in right now. Maybe we're in a student loan crisis. I want to get to that in a second. But this is not an acute emergency. This pandemic is the excuse, I guess, that they're using. They can't even really defend it. Nancy Pelosi said it wasn't legal. Jen Psaki said it wasn't legal. Like, it isn't legal. And so if we're going to be part of a
Joe Biden said I
pro-democracy,
can't do this. Joe Biden himself
right?
said I don't have the power to do that without congressional action. He
So,
said that
yeah. So if we're going to be
a
part of the
year ago.
pro-democracy, pro-constitutional democracy coalition,
Mm.
okay, we can't just say, oh, well, we can do a little soft autocratic action from the executive as long as he's nice and as long as the thing that he's doing is helpful. Even if you think it's helpful and you think it's good and you disagree with some of our political analysis, you know, just because they did it doesn't mean we can do it, right? Like, there has to be some limits that responsible people put on, what an executive branch is allowed to do, and I really don't want the next Republican president to build a wall or fund some child separation internment camps, like, and be able to say, well, we're in an emergency and I can just do this, and it's the same justification
Okay.
that Joe Biden used, and obviously they might do it anyway, blah blah
Yeah.
blah. But
This
I'm sorry, it's just like, you have to at least, even if you like this, you have to at least admit that this is not the way to do it.
Okay, so I agree with you. However, I think we've already crossed that line.
Yeah,
I mean, I
probably.
think we're in this spiral where people actually like if I want it, if it's something I favor, then yes, absolutely, presidential fiat. Using some sort of stretching the emergency powers as far as they possibly can to get what I want. So you have a president who now, and again, for people who think that we're being unfair here, I think Joe Biden himself was very, very skeptical. Nancy Pelosi said very clearly, we need congressional action. And when we talk about this in terms of democracy, what you just said is not irrelevant. This is really, really important because if we get to a point where any president of either party can say, because I declare this emergency, I am going to unilaterally declare this policy, spend trillions of dollars, or ban this, or legalize this, then we have become, some form of, maybe it's a soft autocracy, maybe it's a harder autocracy, but it is not a constitutional republic in which Congress has the power of the purse strings and Congress makes these, we actually change the laws. So be careful what you wish for. but I think we've crossed this. I just think that, you saw this with Obama, you saw this with Trump, you're seeing it with Biden. The next time around, there will be use this as a precedent and the cycle will continue. And then everybody will switch teams. Like, no, we want the president to rule, by fiat. No, that's terrible. The president rules by fiat. And the only distinction is if the other guy's in the White House, you take one position. When your guy's in the White House, I mean, this is where we're at now. And I'm sorry. Now,
Yeah.
in terms of the crisis, they're using the pandemic, or they're using war powers, or just
Yeah, they're using the pandemic.
yeah.
And the war. They're going back to a post 9/11
I know.
justification for, I forget what the grace was given for a certain category of people after 9/11. I'd have to go back and look, but it's a post 9/11 federal guidance that now they are updating and saying, well, because of the pandemic, we can do
Yeah,
this. It's just like, come on. I don't. Maybe it's one thing. I don't. Again, it's like
it's
we're going to
important.
stop collecting interest. I think that there may be other ways to do this. It is important. The other thing is they don't have the votes. This is the other frustrating thing. One of the reasons they're not going through Congress, it doesn't have to do with the filibuster. They don't have the Democratic votes to do this, right? And so again, I just think that's a sign that they didn't have the goods here, and maybe they could have come up with something else that did have it. I do want to just say this about the policy that is, because I think we've all been very, Bulwark at large has been pretty harsh on this for good reason, but I think that something that does get lost, and the Democrats are going to have to try to message, which is much more challenging and complicated to message than what Republicans have. To your bumper sticker point, is that like there are a lot, the student loan system is a total fucking scam. And it is completely different than it was 40 years ago, right? And when a lot of the boomers who are complaining about this, we're going through college, like the price is through the roof. The federal government has a lot of responsibility for this, but so do basically loan sharks, level rates that they're making people pay for some of these student loans. And this is not, most of the people getting helped by this are, actually people that didn't have a parent, this is not Lawrence Tribe's class that's being helped by this, right?
Yeah,
Like it's mostly people that didn't have a parachute. And I just think about in my life, right? Like I can think of 3 people in my life that like didn't know what they wanted to do in college, went to college because they were told that they should, we got parents and guidance counselors pushing people into college, and didn't do particularly well, decided to go to some alternative kind of school, culinary school or whatever. 2 of these 3, had a safety net in their parents, right, that were able to kind of fund this, sort of dithering through their early 20s and didn't come out with huge debt. One person I was just hearing from yesterday, had kind of a similar path, didn't have that safety net, right? Ended up having to drop out of college, ended up working in restaurants. And, this basically clears out their debt. Like that person is not a college grad that went and learned gender studies. Like they did
right.
what all of the like Republicans say that we want. They like tried to learn a trade, went to culinary school, but like we're sitting on 2 years of debt from the state school they went to, and then culinary school, the loan are ridiculous. And, now you're working in a restaurant, and,
Yeah, yeah.
and, that takes, right. And I'm sympathetic to this, right.
I am
Am.
too.
I really
Okay,
am.
but I think this is where you have the real policy flaw. I have written multiple whole books about the higher education cartel, about the incredibly bloated cost of college education, the bloated bureaucracies, the bloated spending, the escalation of tuition costs way beyond the rate of inflation. That is a genuine crisis of cost and affordability. This does not address that. This includes no reform of higher education. This does nothing for future students who will borrow money except to create moral hazard. What this does is it's a one time giveaway that actually will make things worse because it's a signal, hey, there's this free money. Colleges have responded to every signal of free money by doing what? By making it more expensive. And especially now that you're forgiving debt, it might actually induce some students to go deeper into debt in the future. So it's regressive, it's ineffective, it might be counterproductive about this, but there is a genuine crisis here about the cost and accessibility of higher education that if you're throwing around $500 billion, you could have done some. You could have, created, a pathway for more people to community colleges or to these trade schools or to the culinary schools, or a safety net for people who are genuinely in need. And in terms of the stories about people who are deeply in debt, we could have a future president using the exact same logic and powers to unilaterally say, okay, student debt was bad, but why not do mortgage debt, $11 trillion? How about auto loan debt, $1.5 trillion? You want to talk about a ripoff? How about credit card debt? You talk about loan sharks. You know what? Who's a loan shark? You have a credit card. Do you know how much interest you're paying on that? I mean, how in 2022 do lenders in the current environment, when interest rates were like what, point, 5, they were charging you, Tim Miller, and me, they were charging us 24%. And I didn't hear Elizabeth Warren out there saying, you know what, people are really struggling under their credit card debt. They're struggling under medical debt. We ought to wipe out those.
Yeah, a Democratic congressman who I like a lot, actually, Jake Auchincloss out of Massachusetts, said this basically yesterday. I would rather we did medical debt.
Well, exactly. I've been saying this for months. In terms of real need, this feels like, and when I say pander before, and people are going to blow back on, basically, look, why did this happen? Because they were convinced that this would motivate the progressive base. This would motivate young voters. Well, that's a payoff to voters. That's not a public policy that will solve the problem of higher education and who should go to college. How do we connect people with their education? This is just doing it. So I find this to be very, very frustrating. And it's one of the reasons why so many other Democrats, like as you pointed out, including Tim Ryan, the congressman from Ohio, who is running for U.S. Senate against J.D. Vance, who understands exactly how this is going to play in Ohio, and said, look, a college education should be about opening opportunities, but waiving debt for those already on a trajectory to financial security sends the wrong message to millions of Ohioans without a degree working just as hard to make ends meet. Tim Ryan knows this is a political loser, but he also knows that it's a policy shit show as well.
Yeah,
I'm
and
sorry.
no, you're right,
Yeah.
and I know,
Yeah.
and this is gonna be my last thing about this because
Yeah.
I hate to just beat it, but it's true, and there could have been other creative ways, like right for example, what if it was just to say, we're gonna stop actually collecting interest on on these sort of debts over those, so you couldn't, so then Republicans and others couldn't go out and say, oh, actually you're forgiving these debts, like no, actually these people everyone's still gonna have to pay back the principal on their debt, but these interest rates were out of control and this was predatory and the government shouldn't be complicit in this and we should be undercutting actually the cartel, right? I mean, that's just, maybe there are reasons that couldn't work. I'm just saying there are other ideas. The 5% element of this I actually really like, which is like you only have to pay back a certain percent of your salary if you're up
Yes.
to 225. That was great.
Right.
And they should do it through Congress, but that's a great policy. I think
I
I
agree. I agree with you.
yeah, I really like that policy. And then the last thing, okay, and then I'm going to promise stop ranting, is going up to 250 a family. I pulled this up on Google. That's the 98th percentile. The Democrats, like, in the old days, Elizabeth Warren used to rant about people in the 1% that are taking, that are getting a fair deal. This is people in the 2% that are getting this right. Like, why did it go up so high? Who is for that? Going up to 75K. I get, I'm sure then there will be some people that get a raw deal who are in huge debt who make 125K. There are challenges to all these things, but again, as a talking point, going all the way up to $250,000 anyway. So I just think that there are I just want, my final message is I want to say, like, I'm sympathetic to this. It is a scam. We should be doing something to help people get out from under it. This was designed in a way that has a lot of flaws politically and legally, and on the policy.
Okay. Can I make a point of personal privilege?
Please do.
As you know, but maybe the listeners don't know, I'm going to be taking a little bit of time off next week because I have the alignment of the planets right now. I mean, next week is really packed. I'll be back after Labor Day, but I'm not. I mean, I'm not just going to sit on the beach. So
why not?
Well, because I can. Well, I will do a little bit of that. I will because for the first time in 3 years, my French grandkids came over from France, and so they are here, and we haven't seen them in 3 years. So we have the French family here in Wisconsin. Next week, we will all fly to Washington, D.C., where in a period of 4 days, a number of things will happen. The French grandkids will meet their cousins for the very first time.
Oh,
Grandkids for the very, very first time. They've been doing, FaceTime stuff, but they've never actually met their cousins. They weren't born the last time they were here, about, 2 and 1. Then we arrive on Wednesday. By Thursday morning, another granddaughter will be born while we are there.
oh my
Okay? And that
gosh.
could happen today. But the latest that will happen will be Thursday. So everyone will be there. They will be able to potentially meet the new baby while we're here. And then over the weekend, my younger son gets married.
Oh
So
my God.
yeah. And so the extended family will be together for the very first time within days of meeting and the babies. So we have the baby, the reunion, all of this is going to be happening in a very compact next few days. So I thought this was a good time to maybe take off. So for
That
people
is
who
so
think,
cute, Charlie. I'm getting chills for you. Can you, put some little videos of the grandkid
yeah,
meetup in
I
the
know.
Slack or something?
Well, exact. So for people who might think that I'm malingering doing this, then I'm just going to be off next week. Not going to do the podcast, but people will be filling in. We'll have some of the people from the kids table coming in and filling in on the
I'm in a
podcast.
couple of days, and I
Good.
have a couple good guests lined up. I think people are going to really enjoy it.
I am very much looking forward to that. So I will see you on the other side of Labor Day, Mr. Miller.
Charlie, really enjoy it. Enjoy the time with those grandkiddies, and I'll see you in a couple weeks.
Thank you so much. And thank you all for listening to today's Bulwark podcast. I'm Charlie Sykes, and I still have a podcast. It's going to be other folks, but I will talk to you after Labor Day. Have a great holiday.